Hello. So in this video, we're gonna have some conversation with some of my students. So here we have Azaria Pena Alivia, and then we also have Luciana Puspita Dewi, and then we have Erlita Rossi Evani. Yeah. So they're my students in my class, discourse analysis in ELT, and today we're gonna be discussing some topics pertinent to discourse analysis in ELT. My students here, they're actually doing some research on discourse using speech act analysis and also genre analysis. So we're gonna have some question and answer session, and I hope that we can get deeper understanding about speech acts and also genres.
Okay, I want to ask, in genre analysis, what kind of aspects that should be included? I mean, like, is it just written form or spoken?
Okay, that's an
Thank you.
interesting question. Yeah, Erlita. Yes. So, well, actually, when we hear the word genre, we might tend to think that it's about written language because actually the word genre itself originates from the literary works. So that you might remember that maybe in the introduction to literature class, you have been introduced to several genres of literary works, like prose, like poem, like maybe songs, right? So those are typical genres that we used to have in the traditional sense, because the word genre actually came from literature. And then maybe it's the reason why we think that genres are about written text, right? But then linguists, they took the term to analyze different types of text beyond literary works, so that when we think of, let's say, certain genres like movies, for example, we implement genres to movies, and then we have different types of movies like comedy, like romance, right? And then linguists also implement the notion of genres to different texts that are more conventional. Let's say you might have genres like newspaper article, and then you might have email as the new genre that we have in this modern life. And then, is it only about written text? That's the question, right? Is it only about written language? The answer is no. So genre can be about spoken language as well. It can be about spoken discourse as well, because the idea of genre is actually it's about the communicative event. Some scholars define it as communicative event. So genre is a communicative event, and that's why communicative events can take place in the spoken form. For example, you may have speech. Speech is a genre, right?
Oh,
Speech,
casual conversation?
casual conversation, that's a good question, Bena. It's actually a kind of debate between scholars. uh, John Swales, if you know him, yeah, he's a very well-known linguist in the field of discourse analysis. According to John Swales, I think I've watched a video about him saying that conversation is, he thinks that conversation is not a genre. Some scholars, some other scholars might think that conversation is a genre. And let me give you another keyword. So usually genres have recognizable stages. So when we say that it's a genre of text or a genre of discourse, usually we can identify the recognizable stages. Now, the problem with the conversation is that it might not have recognizable stages in certain types of conversation, right? Because it's somehow unpredictable. Like we can we can have conversation about many things, about many topics, anywhere, anytime, right? It depends on who we are talking to. So I think that's what motivates John Swales to think that conversation is not a genre. Yeah. But if you can identify the recognizable stages, because genre has stages, yeah, like speech, for example. Usually in speech we have like opening remarks, and then we have the body of speech, right? And then we have closing, and maybe you know, like the end remark or the closing remarks, right? So usually a genre has stages. In conversation, if you can identify the stages, then probably we can consider it as a genre. But if you ask me personally, well, it's between yes or no. Yeah, you know, it's kind of difficult to identify the stages of conversation. It depends on the conversation. But when we're talking about phone conversation, then maybe I'll say that it's a genre because it usually always starts with hello, right? When you pick up a phone call, you always say hello, right? So that's, I think it's like the one of the stages in phone conversation. Yeah, so it depends on the types of conversations.
Do you think that genre analysis is limited to analyzing the form or the structure, or you said before as stages and purpose of the writings, or is there something else that we can analyze using genre analysis? For example, the language feature, for example?
The answer is yes. I know it's a bit uh, anticlimactic, right? It's a bit anticlimax because I give you the answer directly. Yeah? The answer is yes, but then I'm gonna need to explain. So why is it yes? Because we can identify the linguistic features of a certain genre. So it's not only about stages. For example, if you want to analyze, let's say, an email or maybe cover letter, you want to analyze the genre of cover letters, then of course you can start with the stages. Yeah, you need to remember that letters are categorized as cover letters because they have the same communicative event or communicative purpose, right? What is the purpose of cover letter? The purpose of cover letter is to apply for a job, right? So that's the purpose of cover letter. And then the question that you might ask in doing genre analysis is by asking this maybe. Is there any identifiable stages in cover letters? Do they share the same stages or not? If yes, then I think it's worth studying, right? So your finding can be sort of, the identifiable stages. Cover letters, they share the same characteristics or the same stages, and the stages are A, B, C, D. That's the first thing that you can do. And then the second thing that you can do is when you have a collection of cover letters, sometimes they might be different between one and another. So one cover letter might have a different stages, for example, compared to the other one, or maybe one cover letter might have different style of language, different choice of words compared to the others. So that can also be done in your genre analysis. So it's not only the stages, but also the styles. You can analyze the context. So in what context is the cover letter written? And then who is the writer? Who is the addressee, for example? Who will receive the letter? And then what is the style of the letter? What is the vocabulary that is used in the letter? And then maybe the layout, maybe the participants involved in the letter, and many other things. Yeah, so we can analyze many things, not only the stages but also the linguistic features, maybe the cohesive devices. We can analyze the cohesive devices, the signposting in the cover letters, the topics, and many other things. Yeah. Okay, I think that's my answer. Do you have any other question about genres or maybe about speech acts?
Actually, I have a question about speech acts.
Bennett?
So, how do we differentiate between illocutionary and perlocutionary acts?
Yes. Okay, so that's also a good question. So how do we differentiate between illocutionary and perlocutionary acts? Now, the difference between illocutionary and perlocutionary act, we can define illocutionary as the intended intention, the intended meaning of the speaker. So when we utter something, when we produce a speech act, usually we have intention, right? and that is illocutionary act. Now, what about perlocutionary act? Perlocutionary act is the intended effect that we have on the listener. So, for example, when I say, have you heard that I've bought the new album of BTS? For example, I know that you are a fan of BTS, right? So, have you heard that I've bought the new album of BTS? That's my locutionary act, right? That's my question, my utterance. So the meaning of that utterance, the literal meaning, it's the locutionary act. Now, your question is the difference between illocutionary act and perlocutionary act. Illocutionary act is my intention. When I ask that question, is it a real question, or do you think that I have another intention? Anyone?
You have another intention?
So what
With
do
the
you think is
flexing?
okay? So that flexing is actually, when you think that it's my intention, then you can say that it's my illocutionary act. So let's say my illocutionary act is to do flexing, to to show off. Showing off is my illocutionary act. Now, my intended perlocutionary act, when I show off, when I want to show off to the listener, for example, what is the effect that I expect to have on the listener? Maybe the person will feel amazed, right? So let's say my illocutionary act, my intention is to show off, and then my listener might feel that, oh, I'm amazed with his achievement or her achievement. For example, I'm amazed that he can buy the album, for example. So that's the effect, the intended effect. So you might think differently. I mean, like, you might consider that my illocutionary act, it's actually not a question. It's not a real question. Maybe my illocutionary act is to inform. If you think like in a neutral way, if you haven't figured out that I'm flexing, for example, you might consider that my illocutionary act is to inform. And then what is the intended effect? If I inform that listener, then the intended effect on the listener might be that he or she, that the listener knows that I've bought something. So that's another scenario. So there are actually several scenarios that we might have in speech acts. Yeah. Okay. So what can we conclude from this? Anyone? So do you think that speech acts and genres, do you think that they are related? And how can they help us to understand discourse?
I think that speech act is a part of genre. So when we have a text, for example, a text, and then we first analyze the genre, and then inside the text we can find the speech act, something like that. Sir.
Very good, Lucy. Yes. So that's actually the conclusion that I would like to draw. Yeah. So I would like to say that, yes, like what you said, speech acts are actually parts of genre. You might remember that, in the class, I have said that speech acts are the basic units in discourse. It's like the smallest units that we have in discourse. So we can say that speech acts are smaller than genre. So usually a genre contains various speech acts, right? So we can say that genre is the bigger discourse. It's like the bigger types of discourse, and then the speech acts is the units within that genre. Yeah.
I just want to ask, is every communication can be analyzed by speech act?
I think so. I'd say so, because speech act is like the utterance. Think of speech act like the sentence that you have in written forms. So, for example, when we're talking about written discourse, usually a speech act is a sentence. But when we're talking about spoken discourse, then the speech act that we have is in the form of an utterance. So utterance and sentence are actually the same thing. Utterance is the sentence that we have in spoken form, or the expressions that we have in spoken form, while sentence is the utterance that we have in written form. Yeah. So I'd say that, yeah, in every communication, there's always speech acts. So I think we have come to the end of this discussion. I really appreciate your willingness to join this conversation, and I hope that you can understand something from this discussion. And thank you very much for coming, Luciana, Pina, and Erlita. Bye bye.